One thing we're going to talk about that gets asked a lot if you're doing, say, USB for broadcast, or if you're just doing a stereo bus. We'll start with stereo bus because that's the more common one you're going to see these days. Say, let's go to mixed buses. This is still stereo link, so we'll just use this. Let's say instead of this being an in-ear, which we set it up earlier, this is your mix bus going to live stream. Yes, I know people are going to say, oh, but my room's mono. You'd be better off doing stereo live stream because, yes, I know Facebook is mono after the fact. Let me repeat that. After the fact, if you watch a Facebook live stream after the fact, it will most likely be mono. If you're watching during the moment on a computer, it can be stereo if the stream settings are correct.
YouTube and if they're not overloaded, because a lot of times Facebook and these other platforms, you know, if they get overloaded, they're going to convert it to mono anyway.
YouTube will almost always be stereo. So better benefit of the doubt. If you want your live stream to sound better and you think it sounds thin, try a stereo mix bus and see what happens. You may be surprised. But to get FX to your mix bus, people are going to be like, my bus is here. No. These are your sends. What we're going to go do is click your Aux FX layer in your returns. Click your sends up here, and you can see there's mix bus levels. I can then send the return of my FX units into that mix bus for live stream. That is how you get your FX, like reverb, tap delay, quartz, flanger, whatever you guys may be using. You just simply click on the fader or the channel and exit it and click sends. If you're on a physical board, easiest way to do this is select your mix bus. In the middle of the console is a button that says SOF or sends on fader. Click that. Then go down to the Aux FX layer on your board and bring the fader for the selected return up. That is how you do it physically on a console. X32 rack users, you're going to be using this software, so what we just showed is how you guys do it. But that is how you get FX into a mix bus live stream. Now a USB live stream. This is where it gets tricky. If you are using all 32 channels in your system, you're going to have to start figuring out how to subgroup channels before it goes to your USB card for live stream. The drum submixes, guitars, something. You're going to have to do that if you want these FX returns going to USB. How you would do that?
You definitely want those going in.
Correct. So what you would do is we go to card out, which we're here. You can see we're going to want user in for the last section. Remember, last section if you want FX in. Then go to user outs. This is where it gets tricky, guys. You first notice I can't select my off X returns. It's not an option. This is where it gets a little complicated. You have to go to your aux outs first, and you can select direct X first here, then do doot, 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 doot. Sorry, you can only get 6 of them. Should be more than enough. Once that's selected here, then on user out for the last 32 section, you can select your aux outs right here and do 32, 31, 30, 29, and 28. You notice it comes up and says direct out FX. So unfortunately, it's a 3-step process here. That is unfortunate misstep of Behringer with how it's designed that you cannot directly select your FX outs in user out sections. you have to first send them to an output. But if you notice, oh no, I made them post fader. All we have to do is click them. Again, you can't see my pop out, and go to pre-fader.
Yeah, because all you're doing right there is just putting your mouse on the circle, right mouse clicking it, and that menu will come right up.
Correct. But on my system, since I have multiple monitors, that pop-up is going to a different screen. It's like, if
I know, brother. You sitting over there with something NASA probably wish they had.
So that, now it's all post fader. So if you change the return levels, it's not going to make a difference. And I'll actually briefly talk about that. It's something different. It's not in this routing, but why would FX return values ever change? For those of you that are using FX, I'm about to blow your mind. If you have DCAs controlling your FX, or if you are adjusting FX via the buses that are sending to them, stop. Set your send points of the FX at the maximum you will ever want the reverb to be, or the delay, whatever it is. Set this, don't touch it ever again. Don't. You want your DCAs, or you're going to want to be controlling these instead. Control the return, not the send. Here's why. If your worship pastor starts talking or praying middle of a song, and you need to kill the vocal reverb on him, if you pull down that send, it doesn't matter. It has still sent information to the reverb unit, which is going to get processed and still come out a few seconds after you've pulled that fader down. However, if you pull the return down, you are killing the reverb completely. It's the return after it's already gone through the FX unit. Control your FX via the returns, not the sends. You will get far more granular, better control with your FX systems in an X32. Just a little side tip for you guys out there. Yes, it sounds counterintuitive, but once you try it, you'll figure out that you can get control over your effects so much faster, and it works so much better. But back to the routing we were talking about with USB. So yes, this is how you get your FX out to USB. Now, I know this is going to come up. Dana has heard this mentioned a couple of times in the user groups. I've seen it in other user groups as well. My X32 is not close enough to my stream. Like, if you're using an X32 rack, it may be stage side with your band and you're just mixing via tablet. Happens a lot. Or even if it is at FOH with you, if you're using a full size or a compact, broadcast could be at minimum 50 feet away from you. Active USB extenders sometimes work. I was talking with Dana about this the other day. In my experience, active USB extenders with the X32 will work if you're going up to about 22 to 24 channels at 48 kilohertz. The second you start trying to do all 32 channels, the USB active extenders will start giving you audio dropouts and pops. They're just not meant for that full tilt USB bandwidth all at once. It's just how USB extenders are. They are meant for lower USB data transfer. So now you guys are questioning, okay, how do I get from my console into multitrack or DAW mix if I'm over 50 feet away or if my console's on the stage? There is a product from KlarkTeknik, which is a sister company to Behringer, that is the DN9630.
The infamous DN9630.
Yes, the reason it's infamous is there's a lot of misinformation about that, which we hope to correct here. All the DN9630 is, it is a AES to USB converter. Specifically what it is, I don't know if you know about this data. The KlarkTeknik DN9630 is a very interesting product that the AES side is straight ripped from the receiver card of an M32. It is one of the AES receiver cards in an M32. Straight up, that's what it is. It then goes to a small real-time operating chip, and this is where it gets fun. The KlarkTeknik KT USB. Remember that USB card that we mentioned for the X32? That's the Behringer one. There's a KlarkTeknik one, which does sound a little bit better, but it's negligible. KlarkTeknik took the AES receiver of an M32, connected it directly to the inputs of the KT USB. Normally, the KT USB would be plugged into the expansion card and be getting its audio from the expansion slot pins. Instead, they put both of those devices on a single circuit board, and you're getting direct AES to USB conversion in a little box. That's all it is. It's a conversion of AES to USB. You'd be asking yourselves, why does KlarkTeknik even make it? Again, it comes down to the pro users for Midas. The main big Midas consoles typically don't have USB ports like the M32 or the X32. But then the more that the X32 and the M32 came out, Behringer / Music Tribe, however you want to classify them, realized that a lot of people would be doing things where the card could be doing other duties, where if you have the Dante card, for instance, because some people use Dante for all of your mic inputs and your channel sources. Shure devices, for instance, can speak Dante, so you wouldn't have to use physical XLR. It's very nice, because if you do that, you are eliminating the analog to digital conversion, which will make the audio a little bit more pristine. A lot of people will do that. If you have the Dante card or any of the expansion cards on the board, you no longer have a USB port out of the console to record with. That is where the DN9630 comes from. And Dana and I were talking about this the other day. So many people ask us, well, if it's just AES to USB, can I just connect it straight to a stage box? No. No, you cannot. Here's the biggest reason why.
No, you cannot.
The S16, theoretically, let me just say that. Theoretically, the S16 is the only stage box that could do this. Because the S16 is the only stage box that can be an AES clock master. The DN9630 is hard-coded as AES clock sync. It cannot be a clock master. The other big problem, even though theoretically the S16 will work because it's a clock, you have no gain control. But people are like, oh, but there's this remote Ethernet port on the box. Yes, at one point Music Group had wanted to add stage box control. Currently, that plan is killed. They have said that they may bring back that possibility if enough people ask for it. But currently, if you go look at the Music Tribe forums, there is not enough people asking for that for it to be worthwhile for them.
Right.
So that remote Ethernet port does do nothing. So as it stands, DN9630 has to be connected to something that is a clock master, a console. 2, it does not have gain control. It can only receive and send. Let me repeat that. Most people do not know that the AES50 is bidirectional. It makes sense when you're thinking about stage boxes, but for some reason people throw that wisdom out the window when it comes to this infamous 9630. Yes, the 9630 is bidirectional. And again, we're going to get back to that 48 problem that some people have. Does that mean you could send 48 channels to an X32? Yes, you could. Does that mean you could mix all 48 channels? No. Again, you are capped to 32 physical channels, 1 through 32, and 6 auxes, giving you a maximum of 38 mixable channels. The reason the DN9630 is 48 by 48 is all AES devices are 48 by 48. Here's why we're about to get into why you care about that versus a standard USB. Because even if you have the USB card, sometimes that 9630 will be a better choice for you in a DAW mix. As you saw, the card is still limited to 32 channels, which if you're using all 32 channels, like here we have 16 here, an additional 8 here, but to get the auxes like we just showed, I have to burn up channels just to get the auxes in. I can no longer send all 32 sources and my FX to the DAW mix. That's where the DN9630 comes in. Instead of using card, we go to the all-confusing AES. You would be on the B port, and what you would do is 1 to 32 would match whatever the physical console is. So let's say we're setting up a DN9630 today. I would go here in A. I know that I want this to match local 1 through 8, 9 through 16, and then A here. Now I have 16 additional channels over the USB card that I can use for sending sources to a DAW mix.
Bingo. That is the key thing power. Right there.
That is where the DN9630 is its useful product. Is getting over that 32 limitation of the card. Does not matter which card you're using. Let me specify that. So many people are like, hey, do different cards have different input capability? No. All expansion cards on an X32 M32 is 32 by 32. That is hard it. If you need more than that, this is your option, the DN9630. Also, this gets you past your distance limitation. USB, even with a decent semi-active cable, not extender, active cable. There's a difference, guys. You're maybe looking at 15 feet, which is still pretty good. But if your console like a rack is on stage or your broadcast is in a different room, we're talking 50, 200 feet. USB is not going to do that. Yes, Dante's an option, but again, we have the 32 limit that we're talking about. With the DN9630 being AES, that means the link between it and the console is the maximum allowed link that standard AES 50 is, which is roughly 280 feet. Now, people are going to say, I thought it was just Ethernet, which would be, if you look at Ethernet spec, it's 330. AES is not standard IP protocol. Yes, it uses Cat5e. Let me specify that again. Cat5e cable only, people. If you are having issues with any of your systems and you have used Cat6 or Cat7, yes, the general rule of thumb in the IT world is Cat6, Cat6a, Cat7 is better. In the AES world, it is not. AES is specifically designed for the twist rate of Cat5e. It must be Cat5e, and this is another big one. Behringer will not help you if you did not use shielded cable.
That's right.
Behringer is very specific about that. If you do not have shielded cable to link the EtherCon ports of your stage box to your console, or console to console, or console to the DN9630, you are asking for interference and static issues. I have seen countless churches where I've come in and been asked to help fix their systems. And yes, it was Cat5e, but it was not shielded. And what happened was static had built up in the cable because it was able to move a little bit, portable churches, or the cable was running a ceiling, which if you're using plenum cable is not a problem. The cable can still move and build up static electricity, which in an X32 system, if they're not shielded, that static can either do one of two things. Option 2 is usually the more likely option. Option 1, you will get intermittent issues. Like loud pops, your channel meters will suddenly peak out for no apparent reason and go back to normal. Or sound will sound somewhat garbled on all your channels. Option 2 that I've seen more likely happen. You will fry the AES receiver card in either the console, the stage box, or in some severe cases, both. If that happens, you have to contact Behringer support and get it set back in, and they'll have to replace the receiver card.
And more than likely, they're not going to honor that warranty because they can tell if you're using the right cable with the EtherCon connectors. They've got it figured out to a way. And, you know, when you get these devices now, they've actually got a big card that goes over your AES 50 ports that tells you exactly what you're to use. And when I had a conversation with them, and this was many, many months ago, they simply got tired of trying to explain to people, look, if you're not going to read our manual, then you're voiding your own warranty.
Exactly.
And it was easier for them to put a card on it.
And what he says, that is very true. Up until about 3 years ago, I would say, Behringer would honor the warranty if you had used unshielded cable. But like he said, 3 years ago is when they started putting that red or yellow card. It color changes, but it will be there on your AES ports. It says very clearly, Cat5e STP only. That's what the STP stands for, if you guys didn't know that abbreviation. It stands for Shielded Twisted Pair. When they started adding that card, if you read a very small subsect of the manual now, it does state that if unshielded cable is used and something gets fried, it is not under warranty. That is a big change that they made that was not very publicly displayed for some reason. Like Dana said, they just got fed up with so many people. If you go look at their forums, there is so many questions about this. And in other church groups that are on Facebook, I'm not going to mention any of them because there's too many to mention. It has been one of the most common questions for the longest of times with the X32 is about issues with cable. And 9 times out of 10, it is the person is not using shielded cable. So that is why Behringer started putting that card on the consoles and why they are no longer offering warranty repair. They'll still do the repair. That's the big kicker.
Yeah.
They will repair the console.
Oh, absolutely.
But you will be charged. What that charge is, I don't know because I haven't had a console I've had to do that with me or a client yet.
And you know, brother, I'm the same way. I've never had to sit there and have anybody that I've set up with, that I've talked to, that I've charged to any service for whatsoever, because I am a very big believer. You know, the manufacturer spent all this money on research and development. You know, it's same thing that I used to tell my helpers. As long as I do, or as long as you do what I ask you to do, you'll never be in trouble. You know, you want to go out and build that better mousetrap and something goes south, then you're going to be held responsible. And that's what Behringer did. And that's why we actually have it in a rule, as a rule in our community, you know, that when you agree to join, that you bring up Cat5 cable, it's in one of my buzzwords. You come up here with Cat6 will work, Cat7 will work, your post gets deleted. It's just that simple. You know, we don't want to be involved in promoting false information.
This is a big thing to note. I'm not going to call this brand out. I don't feel like that's fair to this company because they do make good cables. But I'm going to warn you guys about this. If you go on Amazon and search for EtherCon shielded cable, be very, very careful. There is one major brand. Like I said, I'm not going to throw them under the bus for this. They make good cable. But I don't know if they fixed it. I think they did. Their shielded EtherCon cable, for some reason, one of the ends, the shield line was lifted. It was not connected from A to B on the cable like it's supposed to be.
Correct.
Be very, very careful if you buy an EtherCon cable that is listed as STP that you have some kind of tester. The simplest way you can do it, if you don't have an EtherCon cable tester or an Ethernet tester like some of us do, go to Home Depot or a local micro center if you have one, doesn't care what it is. Go get a basic little multimeter. Doesn't have to take that much.
$7.
$7. Put it to what's called continuity. Touch the two probes to each other, you'll hear a beep. Stick one end in the EtherCon. If you look carefully, you'll see a metal around the RJ45. Touch it on one side, do the same on the other side. If you hear a beep, you know your cable's good and the shield is connected all the way through. If you do not hear a beep, return that cable immediately and get a different cable. If the shield is not connected fully, again, it's basically using unshielded cable at that point. Yes, it will be slightly more resistant to static because there's a shield, but it still is not properly shielded to Behringer's spec.
Correct.
So yeah, as we guys were saying, if you're using a DN9630, you do not get 48 back to the console. You get 48 from the console. Now in your DAW or your multi-track software, how you would set this up. I'm going to use my DAW software for an example, Reaper. Once you have the driver installed, I believe it actually does, like I said, shows up as just KT USB, which is what the actual converter chip is.
Correct.
Straight up going to show up as that in your software. Choose that as your input device. And then you're going to set up however many channels you need to do. So if you're only using 32, set up 32. You're setting up 48, set up 48. Now here's where it gets a little different before you do the tracks. Some DAWs, Reaper, PreSonus, Harrison Mixbus, those are the three I've used that I know of that do this. You also have to tell the interface when you've selected it how many channels of that interface you want to use as well. So if you plan to use all 48 channels coming from the console, you need to tell the software, hey, I'm using 48 channels from this interface. Then once that's done, you can set up all your tracks. Set up all your tracks, and then just in your routing, just do a 1-to-1. So interface 1, track 1, all the way through the 48. That will get you all the 48 signals that the DN9630 is receiving from the console into your DAW. Now, what about outputs? Again, we briefly mentioned it. You will not be able to send all 48 channels to a console. Console cannot process all of those. Can only process 38 total. 32 inputs, 6 auxes. That's it. So yes, you could do a 38 channel virtual playback, as it's called. What I mean by that, for people that don't know that term, you would set up the AESB to send all 32 channels plus the 6 auxes out over AESB to your DN9630, which is going to record it. Then when you want to play it back, let me show this on my routing page here, because most people don't know about this. See, there's these two buttons that say record and play. And if you look over here, this is grayed out. That is play. So let's go to play. Notice these are selected now. What I would then do is this. Now I can send, so here I'm receiving from my stage boxes. Yeah, let me switch this aux and local. So then what you would do over here is switch to play, set this up like that, and then aux ins go to B1 through 6. So you will have to set up in your DAW that the channels that were the aux inputs need to be the first outputs in the DAW.
It's kind of backwards.
It is. This is one thing I've wished Behringer would change. It could be that hard to change in software, but you can only ever choose the first blocks of AES or whatever source for aux meet wrap for some reason.
Right.
It'd be nice if they ever changed it, but so here's what you do. Record. Your console sees everything, plus it's sending out everything to the 9630. Your DAW's recording. You want to do that virtual sound check where you're mixing again, but from just a playback file. Go into your inputs and select play. It's now going to flip all of your inputs for the console to come from that playback source of the DN9630. That is how you would do a virtual sound check. That's what this is for. Everyone asks, why is there a record and a play in the routing? That's why. Behringer knows people were doing multi-track recording. This was added in version firmware 4.0. We didn't have this option before. But yeah, that's how you would do a DAW/broadcast mix with the DN9630. Now on the DAW mix, I'm going to mention one thing. People are like, okay, how do I get the main LR of that DAW, that is now my broadcast mix, out? You have a couple of different ways. You can either do what's called an aggregate device on Mac, where you have a secondary interface, say a Focusrite, which is the most popular ones for their price. And in Apple's aggregate device settings, select the DN9630 as all of your input channels. But then for the output section of that aggregate device, select the Focusrite's outputs. Now in your DAW, you choose aggregate device for input and output, not the DN9630. What that will do via aggregate device is when you tell it to use an output via the aggregate device, it's actually telling it to go, instead of the DN9630, you're sending to the Focusrite. You could then take the Focusrite's output straight into your broadcast computer. Very nice use. Now, if you're on a Windows, aggregate device is not a possibility. Yes, I know about ASIO for all and how it can kind of do it. In a production setup, please don't be using that. It can flake out. Just use the standard ASIO setup, and here's what you're going to want to do. Send on 1 and 2 of the AES link back to the console. Now, here's where things get fun. Go to outputs. We're going to go to aux outs, because most people are not going to use these aux outs. And you can select in here. So if we go to aux, like go to aux in, you can see I got direct aux outs of whatever the channel source is. Yes, I know this is going to burn 2 auxes, guys. I'm sorry. Go to auxes like 5 and 6. And go to config. And you will have had it remapped to AES-B. What that then allows you to do is send the return of the LR from broadcast back into the X32 and have the X32 then act as the physical output to broadcast. Yes, I know some people do broadcast DAW mix on the same system as their streaming computer. I personally don't recommend that. I personally recommend computer per device. So if you're recording,
if you're running your Pro Presenter, have a computer for your Pro Presenter. If you're going to sit there and run your streaming audio, have a computer for your streaming audio, unless you've got just a very high-end computer. And then, Marshall, you were telling me this, and that's the bad thing about it, because if that one computer goes out, everything goes out.
Exactly.
You've lost it all.
Basically, this is the thing you guys got to learn. Yes, I get church budgets are tight, but please try to use this video, this section specifically, to tell your board and all this why you want more than one computer. In the world of production, you want to do what's called limited point of failure. Basically, that means if something fails, the only thing that fails is that one specific item. In a non-limited point of failure system, which what a lot of churches do, and I get it, budgets. If you have your streaming computer doing both the switching and the DAW mixing, if that computer crashes, you've lost not just your stream, but if that DAW mix was also recording in the background, you've just lost your multi-track for virtual sound check for that session. It's gone. You're not getting it back. And then the biggest one is, like Dana said, unless you have a very, very powerful system. And even then, most computers do not like doing such hard tasks as a DAW mix and live streaming. Yes, I get that OBS is used a lot. People don't realize how much resources OBS can use. And OBS is not the only streaming software people are out there using. There's Livestream Studio, there's vMix. And if you're using vMix, which, by the way, can use way more resources than OBS, you're definitely going to be wanting to switch to a dedicated broadcast computer. So yes, if you're on Apple and your stream computer is an Apple, if you want a good example of a DAW mix that's using a DN9630, actually, go to YouTube, look up Churchfront. Their YouTube head and their worship pastor there, Jake Gosselin, has a video that they are using a M1 Mac Mini base model with Ableton Live and a DN9630 connected to a Behringer wig to receive all the 48 channels into Ableton. Decent overview video, but it gives you an idea of what you would do if you're doing a dedicated broadcast computer. But that's the biggest gotcha is Mac, you can do aggregate device. Windows, you're going to have to burn up an inputter somehow to get to the outputs of the console. Unfortunately, you cannot route AES signals direct to an output. It's just not a possibility. Like even if I go to out, you can see I got channels, matrix, mix bus, mains, direct outs. You'd have to do an aux remap. Oh, and one thing to know about aux remap, since we're talking about that here, if you do aux remap 1 and 2, we'll do this since we're talking about this for a broadcast. Just do B1 and 2. Just B1 and 2. That's all you need to do. What that will then do is if you look at the console correctly, notice aux 1 and 2 have switched to AESB 1 and 2. But aux 3, 4, 5, and 6 have remained unchanged and are still pulling from the local inputs.
Very good.
That is a big trick. Most people do not realize that if you only select 1 or 2, 1 to 4, the unselected ones will still pull from local. So in this case, if you're doing return, aux 1 and 2, remap, and then in routing for outs, you can then go aux outs. Here's why I mentioned aux outs. I'm going to mention this. If you're using an ATEM MIDI, which is very common for a lot of churches for streaming because it can do your camera switching, its 3.5 millimeter input does not play nicely with the line level of the XLRs on the X32 series. You're better off using the 1/4 inch aux outs. So in that case, we would do this. You would set it up as a direct aux out 1 and 2, which will come straight from the AESB link, straight from your DAW over the DN9630 link. Now, if you have an interface on your streaming computer or something like that, yes, you could route it to one of your XLR outs via the 16 outs over here. Again, just scroll down and you got direct out aux over here. And you would just choose 1 and 2 wherever outputs you need it to be. So that's how you get audio from a console to a DAW for multi-tracking or DAW mix via USB or 9630. And quick recap, USB capped to 32 channels. That's it. 9630. You have full 48 going out. Coming back in, think of it limited as 32 channels because that's the way the board expects to be.